Magic of Thinking Big, Chapter 2. Cure Yourself of Excusitis, the Failure Disease. People, as you think yourself to success, that's what you will study people. You will study people very carefully to discover, then apply success rewarding principles to your life. And you want to begin right away. Go deep into your study of people, and you will discover unsuccessful people suffer a mind deadening thought disease. We call this disease excusitis. Every failure has this disease in its advanced form, and most average persons has at least a mild case of it. You will discover that excusitis explains the difference between a person who is going places and the fellow who is barely holding his own. You will find that the more successful the individual, the less inclined he is to make excuses. But the fellow who has gone nowhere and has no plans for getting anywhere always has a book full of reasons to explain why. Persons with mediocre accomplishments are quick and explain why they haven't, why they don't, why they can't, and why they are not. Study the lives of successful people and you will discover this. All the excuses made by the mediocre fellow could be, but are not made by the successful person. I have never met nor heard of a highly successful business executive, military officer, salesman, professional person, or leader in any field who could not have found one or more major excuses to hide behind. Roosevelt could have hidden behind his lifeless legs. Truman could have used no college education. Kennedy could have said, "I am too young to be president." Johnson and Eisenhower could have ducked behind heart attacks. Like any disease, excusitis gets worse if it is not treated properly. A victim of this thought disease goes through this mental process. I'm not doing as well as I should. What can I use as an alibi that will help me save face? Let us see. Poor health, lack of education, too old, too young, bad luck, personal misfortune, wife, the way my family brought me up. Once the victim of this failure disease has selected a good excuse, he sticks with it. Then he relies on excuse to explain to himself and others why he is not going forward. And each time the victim makes the excuse becomes embedded deeper within his subconsciousness. Thoughts, positive or negative, grow stronger when fertilized with constant repetition. At first, the victim of excusitis knows his alibi is more or less a lie. But the more frequently he repeats it, the more convinced he becomes that it is completely true, that the alibi is the real reason for his not being the successful he should be. Procedure 1. Then in your individual program of thinking yourself to success must be to vaccinate yourself against excusitis, the disease of failures. The 4 most common forms of excusitis. Excusitis appears in a wide variety of forms, but the worst type of this disease are health excusitis, intelligence excusitis, age excusitis, and luck excusitis. Now, let us see just how we can protect ourselves from these 4 common ailments. Number 1. But my health is not good. Health excusitis ranges all the way from the chronic I don't feel good to the more specific I have got such and such wrong with me. Bad health in 1,000 different forms is used as an excuse for failing to do what a person wants to do, failing to accept greater responsibilities, failing to make more money, failing to achieve success. Millions and millions of people suffer from health excusitis. But it is it in most cases a legitimate excuse? Think for a moment of all the highly successful people you know who could but who don't use health as an excuse. My physician and surgeon friends tell me that perfect specimen of adult life is non existent. There is something physically wrong with everybody. Many surrender in whole or in part to health excusitis, but success thinking people do not. Two experiences happened to me in one afternoon that illustrate the correct and incorrect attitude towards health. I had just finished a talk in Cleveland. Afterwards, one fellow about 30 asked to speak to me privately for a few minutes. He complimented me on the meeting, but then he said, I am afraid your ideas cannot do me much good. You see, he continued, I have got a bad heart and I have got to hold myself in check. He went on to explain that he would have seen 4 doctors, but they could not find his trouble. He asked me what I would suggest he do. Well, I said, I know nothing about the heart, but as one layman to another, here are 3 things I would do. First, I would visit the finest heart specialist I could find and accept his diagnosis as final. You have already checked with 4 doctors and none of them has found anything peculiar with your heart. Let the 5th doctor be your final check. It may very well be you have got a perfectly sound heart, but if you keep on worrying about it, eventually you may have a very serious heart ailment. Looking and looking and looking for an illness after actually produces illness. I will repeat again. Looking and looking and looking for an ailment often actually produces illness. The second thing I would recommend is that you read Dr. Schindler's great book, How to Live 365 Days a Year. Dr. Schindler shows in this book that 3 out of every 4 hospital beds are occupied by people who have EII, emotionally induced illness. Imagine 3 out of 4 people who are sick right now would be well if they had learned how to handle their emotions. Read Dr. Schindler's book and develop your program for emotions management. Third, I would resolve to live until I die. I went on to explain to this troubled fellow some sound advice I received many years ago from a lawyer friend who had an arrested case of tuberculosis. The friend knew he would have to live a regulated life, but this has not stopped him from practicing law, rearing a fine family, and really enjoying life. My friend, who now is 78 years old, expresses his philosophy in these words: I am going to live until I die, and I am not going to get life and death confused. While I am on this earth, I am going to live. Why be only half alive? Every minute a person spends worrying about dying is just 1 minute that fellow might as well have been dead. I had to leave at that point because I had to be on certain plan for Detroit. On the plane, the second but much more pleasant experience occurred. After the noise of the takeoff, I heard a ticking sound. Rather startled, I glanced at the fellow sitting beside me, for the sound seemed to be coming from him. He smiled a big smile and said, "Oh, it is not a bum. It's just my heart." I was obviously surprised, so he proceeded to tell me what had happened. Just 21 days before, he had undergone an operation that involved putting a plastic valve into his heart. The ticking sound, he explained, would continue for several months until new tissue had grown over the artificial valve. I asked him what he was going to do. "Oh," he said, "I have got big plans. I'm going to study law when I get back to Minnesota. Someday I hope to be in government work. The doctors tell me I must take it easy for a few months, but after that I will be like new." There you have two ways of meeting health problems. The first fellow, not even sure he had anything organically wrong with him. He was worried, depressed, on the road to defeat, wanting somebody to second his emotions that he could not go forward. The second individual, after undergoing one of the most difficult of operations, was optimistic, eager to do something. The difference lay in how they thought toward health. I have had some very direct experience with health excusitis. I am a diabetic. Right after I discovered I had this ailment, about 5,000 hypodermics ago, I was warned diabetes is a physical condition, but the biggest damage results from having a negative attitude toward it. Worry about it and you may have real trouble. Naturally, since the discovery of my own diabetes, I have gotten to know a great many other diabetics. Let me tell you about two extremes. One fellow who has a very mild case belongs to the fraternity of the living dead. Obsessed with the fear of the weather, he is usually ridiculously bundled up. He is afraid of infection, so he shuns anybody who has the slightest sniffle. He is afraid of overexertion, so he does almost nothing. He spends most of his mental energy worrying about what might happen. He bores other people telling them how awful his problem really is. His real ailment is not diabetes. Rather, he is a victim of health excusitis. He has pitied himself into being an invalid. The other extreme is a division manager for a large publishing company. He has a severe case. He takes about 30 times as much insulin as the fellow mentioned above. But he is not living to be sick. He is living to enjoy his work and have fun. One day he said to me, "Sure, it is an inconvenience, but so is shaving. But I'm not going to think myself to bed when I take those shots. I just praise the guys who discovered insulin." A good friend of mine, a widely known college educator, came home from Europe in 1945 minus one arm. Despite his handicap, John is always smiling, always helping others. He's about as optimistic as anyone I know. One day he and I had a long talk about his handicap. "It is just an arm," he said. "Sure, two are better than one, but they just cut off my arm. My spirit is 100% intact. I'm really grateful for that." Another amputee friend is an excellent golfer. One day I asked him how he had been able to develop such a near perfect style with just one arm. I mentioned that most golfers with two arms cannot do nearly as well. His reply says a lot. "Well, it's my experience," he said, "that the right attitude and one arm will beat the wrong attitude and two arms every time. The right attitude and one arm will beat the wrong attitude and two arms every time." Think about that for a while. It holds true not only on the golf courses but in every facet of life. 4 things you can do to lick health excusitis. The best vaccine against health excusitis consists of these 4 doses. Number 1. Refuse to talk about your health. The more you talk about an ailment, even the common cold, the worse it seems to get. Talking about bad health is like putting fertilizer on weeds. Besides, talking about your health is a bad habit. It bores people. It makes one appear self-centered and old maidish. Success-minded people defeat the natural tendency to talk about their bad health. One may, and let me emphasize the word may, get a little sympathy, but one does not get respect and loyalty by being a chronic complainer. Number 2. Refuse to worry about your health. Dr. Walter Alvarez, emeritus consultant to the world-famous Mayo Clinic, wrote recently, "I always beg worries to exercise some self-control. For instance, when I saw this man, a fellow who was convinced he had a diseased gallbladder, although 8 separate X-ray examinations showed that the organ was perfectly normal, I begged him to quit getting his gallbladder X-rayed. I have begged hundreds of heart-conscious men to quit getting electrocardiogram made." Number 3. Be genuinely grateful that your health is as good as it is. There is an old saying worth repeating often. I felt sorry for myself because I had ragged shoes until I met a man who had no feet. Instead of complaining about not feeling good, it is far better to be glad you are as healthy as you are. Just being grateful for the health you have is powerful vaccination against developing new aches and pains and real illness. Number 4. Remind yourself often it's better to wear out than rust out. Life is yours to enjoy. Don't waste it. Don't pass up living by thinking yourself into a hospital bed. But you have got to have brains to succeed. The second excusitis after health excusitis is intelligence excusitis. Intelligence excusitis, or I lack brains, is common. In fact, it is so common that perhaps as many as 95% of the people around us have it in varying degree. Unlike most other type of excusitis, people suffering from this particular type of the malady suffer in silence. Not many people will admit openly that they think they lack adequate intelligence. Rather, they feel it deep down inside. Most of us make two basic errors with respect to intelligence. We underestimate our brain power. We overestimate the other fellow's brain power. Because of these errors, many people sell themselves short. They fail to tackle challenging situations because it takes a brain. But along comes the fellow who is not concerned about intelligence, and he gets the job. What really matters is not how much intelligence you have, but how you use what you do have. The thinking that guides your intelligence is much more important than the quantity of your brain power. Let me repeat, for this is vitally important. The thinking that guides your intelligence is much more important than how much intelligence you may have. In answering the question, should your child be a scientist? Dr. Edward Teller, one of the nation's foremost physicists, said, "A child does not need a lightning fast mind to be a scientist, nor does he need a miraculous memory, nor is it necessary that he get very high grades in school. The only point that counts is that the child have a high degree of interest in science. Interest, enthusiasm is the critical factor even in science. With a positive, optimistic, and cooperative attitude, a person with an IQ of 100 will earn more money, win more respect, and achieve more success than a negative, pessimistic, uncooperative individual with an IQ of 120. Just enough sense to stick with something, a chore, task, project, until it's completely pay off. Much is much better than idle intelligence, even if idle intelligence be of genius caliber. For stickability is 95% of ability. At a homecoming celebration last year, I met a college friend whom I had not seen for 10 years. Chuck was a very bright student and was graduated with honors. His goal when I last saw him was to own his own business in western Nebraska. I asked Chunk what kind of business he finally established. Well, he confessed, "I did not go into business myself. I would not have said this to any one 5 years ago or even 1 year ago. But now I am ready to talk about it." As I look back at my college education now, I see that I became an expert in why a business idea won't work out. I learned every conceivable pitfall, every reason why a small business will fail. You have got to have ample capital. But sure, the business cycle is right. Is there a big demand for what you will offer? Is local industry stabilized? 1,001 things to check out. The thing that hurts most is that several of my old high school friends who never seemed to have much on the ball and did not even go to college now are very well established in their own businesses. But me, I am just plodding along, auditing freight shipments. Had I been drilled a little more in why a small business can succeed, I would be better off in every way today. The thinking that guides Chuck's intelligence was a lot more important than the amount of Chuck's intelligence. Why some brilliant people are failures. I have been close for many years to a person who qualifies as the genius, has high abstract intelligence, and is Phi Beta Kappa. Despite this very high native intelligence, he is one of the most unsuccessful people I know. He has a very mediocre job. He is afraid of responsibility. He has never married, lots of marriages and in divorce. He has few friends. People bore him. He is never invented in property of any kind. He might lose his money. This man uses his great brain power to prove why things would not work rather than directing this mental power to searching for ways to succeed. Because of the negative thinking that guides this great reservoir of brains, this fellow contributes little and creates nothing. With a changed attitude, he could go greater things indeed. He has the brains to be a tremendous success, but not the thought power. Another person I know well was inducted into the army shortly after earning the PhD degree from a leading New York university. How did he spend his 3 years in the army? Not an officer, not as a staff specialist. Instead, for 3 years, he drove a truck. Why? Because he was filled with the negative attitude toward fellow soldiers. I am superior to them. Toward army methods and procedures, they are stupid. Toward discipline, it is for others, not for me. Toward everything, including himself, I am a fool for not figuring out a way to escape this rap. This fellow earned no respect from anyone. All his vast store of knowledge lay buried. His negative attitudes turned him into a flunky. Remember, the thinking that guides your intelligence is much more important than how much intelligence you have. Not even a PhD degree can override this basic success principle. Several years ago, I became a close friend of Phil F., one of the senior officers of a major advertising agency. Phil was director of marketing research for the agency and he was doing a bang up job. Was Phil a brain? Far from it. Phil knew next to nothing about research technique. He knew next to nothing about statistics. He was not a college graduate, though all the people working for him were. And Phil did not pretend to know the technical side of research. What then enabled Phil to command $30,000 a year, while not one of his subordinates earned even 10,000? This Phil was a human engineer. Phil was 100% positive. Phil could inspire others when they felt low. Phil was enthusiastic. He generated enthusiasm. Phil understood people, and because he could really see what made them tick, he liked them. Not Phil's brain, but how he managed those brains made him 3 times more valuable to his company than men who rated higher on the IQ scale. Out of every 100 persons who enroll in college, fewer than 50 will graduate. I was curious about this, so I asked a director of admissions at a large university for his explanation. It is not insufficient intelligence, he said. We do not admit them if they do not have sufficient ability. And it is not money. Anyone who wants to support himself in college today can do so. The real reason is attitudes. You would be surprised, he said, how many young people leave because they do not like their professors, the subjects they must take, and their fellow students. The same reason, negative thinking, explains why the door to top flight executives' position is closed to many young junior executives. Sour, negative, pessimistic, depreciating attitudes rather than insufficient intelligence hold back thousands of young executives. As one executive told me, it is a rare case when we pass up a young fellow because he lacks brain. Nearly always it is attitude. Once I was retained by an insurance company to learn why the top 25% of the agents were selling over 75% of the insurance, while the bottom 25% of the agents sold only 5% of the total volume. Thousands of personnel files were carefully checked. The search proved beyond any question that no significant difference existed in native intelligence. What is more, differences in educated did not explain the difference in selling success. The difference in the very successful and the very unsuccessful finally reduced to differences in attitudes, or differences in thought management. The top group worried less, was more enthusiastic, had a sincere liking for people, has a sincere liking for people. We cannot do much to change the amount of native ability, but we can certainly change the way we use what we have. Knowledge is power when you use it constructively. Closely allied to intelligence, excusitis is some incorrect thinking about knowledge. We often hear that knowledge is power, but this statement is only a half truth. Knowledge is only potential power. Knowledge is power only when put to use, and then only when the use made of it is constructive. The story is told that the great scientist Einstein was once asked, "How many feet are in a mile?" Einstein's reply was, "I don't know. Why should I fill my brain with facts I can find in 2 minutes in any standard reference books?" Einstein taught us a big lesson. He felt it was more important to use your mind to think than to use it as a warehouse of facts. One time, Henry Ford was involved in a libel suit with Chicago Tribune. The Tribune had called Ford an ignoramus, and Ford said, in effect, prove it. The Tribune asked him scores of simple questions such as who was Benedict Arnold? When was the Revolutionary War fought? And others, most of which Ford, who had little formal education, could not answer. Finally, he became quite exasperated and said, I don't know the answers to these questions, but I could find a man in 5 minutes who knows. Henry Ford was never interested in miscellaneous information. He knew what every major executive knows, that the ability to know how to get information is more important than using the mind as a garage for facts. How much is a fact man worth? I spent a very interesting evening recently with a friend who is the president of a young but rapidly growing manufacturing concern. The TV set happened to be turned to one of the most popular quiz programs. The fellow being quizzed had been on the show for several weeks. He could answer questions on all sorts of subjects, many of which seemed nonsensical. After the fellow answered a particularly odd question, something about a mountain in Argentina, my host looked at me and said, how much do you think I would pay that guy to work for me? How much? I asked. Not a cent over $300, not per week, but per month, but for a life. I have sized him up. That expert can't think. He can only memorize. He is just a human encyclopedia. And I figure for $300 I can buy a pretty good set of encyclopedias. In fact, maybe that is too much. 90% of what that guy knows I can find in a $2 almanac. What I want around me, he continued, are people who can solve problems, who can think up ideas, people who can dream and then develop the dreams into a practical application. An idea man can make money with me. A fact man cannot. 3 ways to cure intelligence excusitis. 3 easy ways to cure intelligence excusitis are: number 1. Never underestimate your own intelligence and never overestimate the intelligence of others. Don't sell yourself short. Concentrate on your assets. Discover your superior talents. Remember, it's not how many brains you have got that matters. Rather, it is how you use your brain that counts. Manage your brain instead of worrying about how much IQ you have got. Number 2, remind yourself several times daily, many attitudes are more important than my intelligence. Remind yourself several times daily that my attitudes are more important than my intelligence. At work and at home, practice positive attitudes. See the reason why you can do it, not the reason why you can't. Develop an I am winning attitude. Put your intelligence to creative positive use. Use it to find ways to win, not to prove you will lose. Remember that the ability to think is of much greater value than the ability to memorize facts. Use your mind to create and develop ideas, to find new and better ways to do things. Ask yourself, am I using my mental ability to make history, Or am I using it merely to record history made by others? It is no use. I am too old or too young. Age excusitis is the third type of excusitis, the failure disease of never being the right age, comes in two easily identifiable forms: the I am too old variety and the I am too young brand. You have heard hundreds of people of all ages explain their mediocre performance in life something like this: I am too old or too young to break in now. I cannot do what I want to do or am capable of doing because of my age handicap. Really, it is surprising how few people feel they are just right, age wise, and it's unfortunate. This excuse has closed the door of real opportunity to thousands of individuals. They think their age is wrong, so they do not even bother to try. The I am too old variety is the most common form of age excusitis. This disease is spread in subtle ways. TV fiction is produced about the big executive who lost his job because of a merger and cannot find another because he's too old. Mr. Executive looks for months to find another job, but he cannot, and in the end, after contemplating suicide for a while, he decides to rationalize that it is nice to be on the shelf. Plays and magazines articles on the topic why you are washed up at 40 are popular, not because they represent true facts, but because they appeal to many worried minds looking for an excuse. How to handle age excusitis? Age excusitis can be cured. A few years ago, while I was conducting a sales training program, I discovered a good serum that both cures this disease and vaccinates you so you won't get it in the first place. In that training program, there was a trainee named Cecile. Cecile was 40, wanted to shift over to set himself up as a manufacturer's representative, but he thought he was too old. After all, he explained, I would have to start from scratch, and I am too old for that now. I am 40. I talked with Cecile several times about his old age problem. I used the old medicine. You are only as old as you feel. But I found I was getting nowhere. Too often people retort with, but I do feel old. Finally, I discovered a method that worked. One day after a training session, I tried it on Cecile. I said, Cecile, when does a man's productive life begin? He thought a couple of seconds and answered, oh, when he is about 20, I guess. Okay, I said, now when does a man's productive life ends? Cecile answered, well, if he stays in good shape and likes his work, I guess a man is still pretty useful when he is 70 or so. All right, I said, a lot of folks are highly productive after they reach 70. But let us agree with what you have just said. A man's productive years stretch from 20 to 70. That's 50 years in between, or half a century. Cecile, I said, you are 40. How many years of productive life you have? 20, he answered. And how many have you left? 30, he replied. In other words, Cecile, you have not even reached the halfway point. You have used up only 40% of your productive years. I looked at Cecile and realized he has gotten the point. He was cured of age excusitis. Cecile saw he still had many opportunity, field sheer left. He switched from thinking, I am already old, to I am still young. Cecile now realized that how old we are is not important. It is one's attitude toward age that makes it is a blessing or a barricade. Curing yourself of age excusitis often opens doors to opportunities that you thought were locked tight. A relative of mine spent years doing many different things, selling, operating his own business, working in a bank, but he never quite found what he really wanted to do most. Finally, he concluded that the one thing he wanted more than anything else was to be a minister. But when he thought about it, he found he was too old. After all, he was 45, had three young children and little money. But fortunately, he mustered all of his strength and told himself, 45 or not, I am going to be a minister. With tons of faith but little else, he enrolled in a 5 year ministerial training program in Wisconsin. 5 years later, he was ordained as a minister and settled down with a fine congregation in Illinois. Old? Of course not. He still has 20 years of productive life ahead of him. I talked with this man not long ago, and he said to me, you know, if I had not made that great decision when I was 45, I would have spent the rest of my life growing old and bitter. Now I feel every bit as young as I did 25 years ago. And he almost looked it too. When you lick age excusitis, the natural result is to gain the optimism of youth and feel of youth. When you beat down your fears of age limitations, you add cheers to your life as well as success. A former university colleague of mine provides an interesting angle on how age excusitis was defeated. Bill was graduated from Harvard in 1920s. After 24 years in the stock brokerage business, during which time he made a modest fortune, Bill decided he wanted to become a college professor. Bill's friends warned him that he would overtax himself in rugged learning program ahead. But Bill was determined to reach his goal and enrolled in the University of Illinois at the age of 51. At 55, he had earned his degree. Today, Bill is chairman of the Department of Economics at a fine liberal arts college. He is happy too. He smiles when he says, I have got almost a third of my good years left. Old age is a failure disease. Defeat it by refusing to let it hold you back. When is a person too young? The I am too young variety of age excusitis does much damage too. About a year ago, a 23-year-old fellow named Jerry came to me with a problem. Jerry was a fine young man. He had been a paratrooper in the service and then he had gone to college. While going to college, Jerry supported his wife and son by selling for a large transfer and storage company. He had done a terrific job both in college and for his company. But today Jerry was worried. Dr. Schwartz, he said, I have got a problem. My company has offered me the job of sales manager. This would make me supervisor over 8 salesmen. Congratulations, that's wonderful news, I said, but you seem worried. Well, he continued, all 8 men I am supervise I am to supervise are from 7 to 21 years older than I. What do you think I should do? Can I handle it? Jerry, I said, the general manager of your company obviously thinks you are old enough, or he would not have offered you this job. Just remember these 3 points and everything will work out just fine. First, do not be age conscious. Back on the farm, a boy became a man when he proved he could do the work of a man. His number of birthdays had nothing to do with it. And this applies to you. When you prove you are able to handle the job of sales manager, you are automatically old enough. Second, do not take advantage of your new gold bars. Show respect for the salesmen. Ask them for their suggestions. Make them feel they are working for a team captain, not a dictator. Do this and men will work with you, not against you. Third, get used to having older persons working for you. Leaders in all fields soon find they are younger than many of the people they supervise. So get used to having older men work for you. It will help you a lot in the coming years when even bigger opportunities develop. And remember, Jerry, your age won't be a handicap unless you make it one. Today, Jerry is doing fine. He loves the transportation business, and now he's planning to organize his own company in a few years. Youth is a liability only when the youth thinks it is. You often hear that certain jobs require considerable physical maturity. Jobs like selling securities and insurance, that you have got to have either gray hair or no hair at all in order to gain an investor's confidence in is plain nonsense. What really matters is how well you know your job. If you know your job and understand people, you are sufficiently mature to handle it. Age has no real relation to ability unless you convince yourself that years alone will give you the stuff you need to make your mark. Many young people feel that they are being held back because of their youth. Now, it is true that another person in an organization who is insecure and job sacred may try to block your way forward using age or some other reason. But the people who really count in the company will not. They will give you as much responsibility as they feel you can handle well. Demonstrate that you have ability and positive attitudes, and your youthfulness will be considered an advantage. In quick recap, the cure for age excusitis is: number 1, look at your present age positively. Think, I am still young, not I am already old. Practice looking forward to new horizons and gain the enthusiasm and the feel of youth. Number 2, compute how much productive time you have left. Remember, a person aged 30 still has 80% of his productive life ahead of him, and the 50 years old still has a big 40%, the best 40% of his opportunity years left. Life is actually longer than most people think. And number 3, invest future time in doing what you really want to do. It's too late only when you let your mind go negative and think it's too late. Stop thinking, I should have started years ago. That is failure thinking. Instead, think, I'm going to start now. My best years are ahead of me. That's the way successful people think. And the fourth type of excusitis, but my case is different. I attract bad luck. Bad luck are believe in luck is the first type of excusitis. Recently, I heard a traffic engineer discuss highway safety. He pointed out that upward of 40,000 persons are killed each year in so-called traffic accidents. The main point of his talk was that there is no such thing as a true accident. What we call an accident is the result of human or mechanical failure or a combination of both. What this traffic expert was saying substantiates what wise men throughout the ages have said. There is a cause for everything. Nothing happens without a cause. There is nothing accidental but the weather outside today. It is the result of specific causes. And there is no reason to believe that human affairs are an exception. Yet hardly a day passes that you do not hear someone blame his problems on bad luck. And it is a rare day that you do not hear someone attribute another person's success to good luck. Let me illustrate how people succumb to luck excusitis. I lunched recently with three young junior executives. The topic of conversation that day was George C., who just yesterday had been picked from among their group for a major promotion. Why did George get the position? These three fellows dug up all sorts of reasons: luck, pull, bootlicking, George's wife and how she flattered the boss. Everything but the truth. The fact were that George was simply better qualified. He had been doing a better job. He was working harder. He had a more effective personality. I also knew that the senior officers in the company had spent much time considering which one of the four would be promoted. My three disillusioned friends should have realized that top executives do not select major executives by drawing names from a hat. I was talking about the seriousness of luck excusitis not long ago with the sales executives of a machine tool manufacturing company. He became excited about the problem and began to talk about his own experience with it. I have never heard it called that before, he said, but it is one of the most difficult problems every sales executive has to wrestle with. Just yesterday, a perfect example of what you are talking about happened in my company. One of the salesmen walked in about 4 o'clock with a $112,000 order for machine tools. Another salesman, whose volume is so low he has a problem, was in the office at the time. Hearing John tell the good news, he rather enviously congratulated him and then said, "Well, John, you are lucky again." Now, what the weak salesman won't accept is that luck had nothing to do with John's big order. John had been working on that customer for months. He had talked repeatedly to a half dozen people out there. John had stayed up nights figuring out exactly what was best for them. Then he got our engineers to make preliminary designs of the equipment. John wasn't lucky unless you can call carefully planned work and potentially executed plans luck. Suppose luck were used to reorganize General Motors. If luck determined who does what and who goes where, every business in the nation would fall apart. Assume for a moment that General Motors were to be completely reorganized on the basis of luck. To carry out the reorganization, the names of all employees would be placed in a barrel. The first name drawn would be the president, the second name, the executive vice president, and so on down in the line. Sounds stupid, doesn't it? Well, that's how luck would work. People who rise to the top in any occupation, business, management, selling, law, engineering, acting, or what have you, get there because they have superior attitude and use their good sense in applied hard work. Conquer luck excusitis in two ways. Number one, accept the law of cause and effect. Take a second look at what appears to be someone's good luck. You will find that not luck but preparation, planning, and success producing thinking preceded his good fortune. Take a second look at what appears to be someone's bad luck. Look, and you will discover certain specific reasons. Mr. Success receives a setback. He learns and profits. But when Mr. Mediocre loses, he fails to learn. Number two, don't be a wishful thinker. Don't waste your mental muscles dreaming of an effortless way to win success. We do not become successful simply through luck. Success comes from doing those things and mastering those principles that produce success. Do not count on luck for promotions, victories, the good things in life. Luck simply is not designed to deliver these good things. Instead, just concentrate on developing those qualities in yourself that will make you a winner.